Why I recommend virtual assistants? It's a bit of a plug in one way, but in another, it makes a bit of sense. Virtual assistants is something where basically you have somebody who works offshore or remote. Now, first thing is they don't need to be foreign for a start. There's a lot of people hovering around the Philippines and other remote places that are from the West and have very specific skill sets. They're very useful and can be a cheaper resource offshore because you haven't got any of that corporate expense of having an office and a seat for them. The second thing is, because they're offshore, they're normally quite happy to do 16 hours a day sometimes to push a project through where the guy sat in the office may not be interested. It's a different mentality because they're living where they want to live. They're doing what they want to do, but they also rely on some of that cash coming through to keep them where they are. So they've got a bit of commitment there, where the person in the office is often on the 9 till 5 clock on, clock off, because often that's how the company treats them, so the company can't really complain if that's exactly how they work. But yeah, the virtual assistants though, a lot of people just assume they do telemarketing. They don't. They can do your graphics design, they can do your apps, they can do spreadsheets, data entry, data processing, receptionist, order your takeaways while you're on the way home so that when you get home the food is on its way. Deal with all the processing with things like getting your kids into school. You know, anything can be done remote, doesn't matter what it is. A virtual assistant can do it. Now, the reason they're quite popular with people in the know, or more younger people than older generations, is because people actually understand that you don't need to be sat in work all the time. You also, a lot of companies do these cutbacks where they remove administration, they remove some of the important people from within an office to save money, but the tasks still need to be done. So what happens is the load is then pushed onto a manager or somebody else. Now, this is where a whole new setup has appeared with virtual assistants, where, say I need a presentation for tomorrow, and it's been dumped on my lap at 3 p.m. and I know I ain't going to get finished in 2 hours. It's going to take me at least 8. I can actually send it over to a virtual assistant in the Philippines, and they will do it in their time zone while I'm asleep. And I'll get up fresh in the morning, ready for a presentation, and they've completed it. Okay, I've had to outline it, but like I said, I had 2 hours before I went home, so I'd actually done all the preparing for them. And this is where some of this falls down when people complain about the quality of virtual assistants. You've got to bear in mind, if you don't outline something properly and say, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I want, blah, 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 you cannot complain that it doesn't come back the way you want it, because you never defined it. But there is a lot more people using virtual assistants these days, even in their own work, even if they're paying themselves. I was talking in my last video about Fiverr. There's a prime example. If I needed a graphics for something, I would go to Fiverr, because I can have it done in sometimes an hour, and back to me to a better standard than I can do it. Like I said, graphics is not something I'm good at, so I wouldn't even argue on somebody producing something, because I know they're going to do a better job. There's no doubt about it, because it's not what I'm good at. But virtual assistants are exactly the same. And if you get a team of virtual assistants, it's surprising what you can have. You can have a whole web development team that you just get as and when. You've got people that do graphic design, 3D CAD drawings, all sorts. And they're not stupid people. This is why investing in a good VA is something I highly recommend if you're running your own business. If you take somebody from the start and work with them, you're going to develop somebody who's part of your team. But not only are they part of your team, they're cheaper than any member of your team, but their quality will come up to the scratch of everybody else. Plus, they're they're going to be incentivized to keep with you because you'll make a full-time job out of it for them. I know myself, all my telephone calls and stuff, I would put in a VA if I wasn't sat with a corporate at the moment, where they might frown upon me utilising people for that. But why would I want to be doing a lot of these tasks which somebody else can do? When I say somebody else, I mean I'm quite expensive on a daily basis, so it makes more sense that I'm utilised for what I'm good at, and I utilise other cheaper labour for what they're good at. And in your business, whatever it may be, you may only need somebody for 5 hours a week or whatever, but you might find you could probably afford somebody full-time for that cost because they're so cheap. If you're just getting somebody basic in the Philippines, it's probably only going to cost you about £400 a month. Where office space, electric and everything else soon racks up more than that in the space they sit in the UK, with the business rates, your rent and everything else. But at the same time, if you've got a couple of other people that you know they're also in business, they could deal with all three. I'll give you a prime example. If you take Skype has got a system where you can add multiple telephone numbers. So you could have a virtual assistant that deals with telephones calls for 5 different companies, because each number is a unique number that gets directed to them, and they know which number it's coming in on, so they know which business it is. That means between 5 companies they've got a full-time receptionist, but they're not paying full-time, they're paying 1/5. It's just that the person is there all the time. So if that costs you £400 a month, that's less than £100 each for somebody to be a full-time receptionist, which also comes in handy for things like when you're on the road a lot, because instead of ignoring calls because you don't want to answer while driving, all you do is you give them a quick call and say, can you take my calls for the next hour? I'm travelling between X and X. And they will then deal with the calls for you. And if anything's come through, they can text it to you or whatever, just to say, yes, John's phoned, who said he's going to be running a bit late, so you don't need to be there for another 45 minutes. You know, whatever it is. That sort of thing keeps everything flowing. Because they also deal with all the crap stuff, or the administration. They deal with a lot of the processes that go on in a business. Because a lot of people get bogged down in companies. I've seen it in the UK. I've seen it with an ex's brother before. He was owed thousands. And although he was out working every hour possible, where he failed was administration. He was owed thousands, but he'd never put the invoices in because he never had time to do it. An admin sat in the Philippines can do all the invoicing and just put it onto a remote printer. So what he has to do when he comes in from work is stick them in an envelope and post them. And even the envelopes you could preload on another printer. So the fact is, how much was he owed? I think he was owed something about £40,000 by a couple of the contracts he was running. But he just hadn't processed the paperwork because he couldn't, because he was on the road. And when he come back on an evening, he was absolutely knackered, so he would just sleep. So you've got to think smart. Is that £400 a month actually going to be better off because of the fact they process everything for you? Which basically means that thousands and thousands of pounds are actually going into your bank account every week instead of just sat in your clients? Or are you better off just working yourself to death? There's loads of reasons you'd use a virtual assistant. And the reason I bring this up is the next video, because there's lots of stuff you can do.